Hi, Unine. Today we're going to have a look at some ways to tackle the assessment task. I've decided to do it as a video just so that I can annotate a document and show you what we're talking about. As you know, your assessment notification is on your iLearn page, along with our QTE table that you should be starting to fill out, and we've given you a few things to start with there. So let's take this opportunity for this lesson to start to think about the assessment, because it will creep up pretty quick, and it's always good to get a bit of a head start with these things. So the essay question is: explain how the boy in the striped pajamas conveys universal messages. So the first step is to think, okay, so what are the universal messages of this novel that we want to talk about in our assessment? So there's a couple that you could think of. The main idea of this novel is how individuals behave in moments of challenge, hardship, fear, oppression. Okay, and so from that, what are the ways in which individuals react to those things differently? So if we brainstorm here, you think about here, so how we all react to, let's call it hardship, including things like fear and oppression. And from that, there's a few different ways people react in this novel, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. So let's think about big overarching concepts: prejudice and discrimination. On the flip side to that, compassion. We've talked a lot about that one already. We can also look at fear and ignorance. That idea that people will go along with what everyone is saying out of fear for themselves, or not really knowing how to react, so they just follow the crowd. And there's this idea of despair. Okay, so there are some ideas. I mean, there's many more of these universal messages, but the whole idea of the novel, and to think about it, is how each person reacts differently to an environment of hardship, fear, and oppression, which we see in Nazi Germany. All right, so your essay is not going to necessarily talk about all of these things, especially because if we think about it, I think you have about 50 minutes for your essay. So you need to pick the ones that you're most familiar with, the ones that you can write about. Okay, so I'm going to do a little bit of a brainstorm, an example of how to write a thesis statement, or more like a purpose sentence for a body paragraph. And I'm going to focus on the ideas of prejudice and discrimination. Okay, so let me just rub those bits out. All right. So we'll come to our quotes in a moment, but you must think, one thing that I think is really important to remember in essay writing and body paragraphs, you must start with a P sentence, which is the purpose. Okay, the purpose of the point of the paragraph. What is your point? You don't need, please, to jump straight into your examples and your quotes. You need to come up with this idea, and it's more of a concept. This idea that we call this a conceptual idea at the beginning. Okay, so my example would be something like, which I stated before, the universal message of how individuals behave in moments of fear and oppression. Okay, so there's the beginning of my point. The universal is often explored in texts that focus on challenging times in our history. Okay, so you'll notice I haven't mentioned the boy in the striped pajamas at all yet, and I actually really like this approach to essay writing. Is your purpose sentence or your thesis statements are standalone. Okay, it's the point of the conceptual point of the paragraph, and then we look at the specific example as we move along. All right, so to continue that, this is still kind of my thesis statement. I'm going to now mention the author and the text. John Boyne explores the theme of prejudice and discrimination throughout the novel. The Boy in the Striped Pajamas. I never remember that. Okay, now it's important to say in your introduction that you name the title in full, but from then on in your essay you can abbreviate it as long as you say it for the first time. And the same goes with the author. You need to name them in full. And then from then on in your essay, you can call them by their last name, not their first name, their last name. All right, so continuing on. John Boyne explores the theme of prejudice throughout his novel Boy in Striped Pajamas by examining the relationships between characters and the adverse environment in which, running out of room here, individuals are treated with contempt. Okay, another word of saying hatred. Okay, so this is almost my first and second sentences in my body paragraph. The universal message of how individuals behave in moments of fear and oppression is often explored in texts that focus on challenging times in our history. Remember, that's conceptual because it doesn't name the text. No text is aligned to that at all. Then I go into the actual text we're looking at. John Boyne explores the theme of prejudice and discrimination throughout the novel, The Boy in the Striped Pajamas, by examining the relationship between characters and the adverse environment in which individuals are treated with contempt. Okay, so that is a good way to start your paragraph, but now we need to think about what examples are going to fit nicely with that purpose sentence. All right, so let's just do a bit of a brainstorm. Okay, so if we're looking at, let's think, so prejudice and discrimination. These are the ideas. Discrimination, yeah. Now we've looked at a couple of things. We have looked at setting so far, and we've looked at characters so far, overarchingly. The two settings we focused on were Berlin and Outwith. And for characters, there's been quite a few that we could talk about in terms of prejudice and discrimination. We've got Bruno. We've got Kotler. We've got Gretel. Bruno's grandmother. Schmoll and Pavel. All right, so remember, in a body paragraph, we're looking at about 2 to 3 quotes or examples to justify what you've said. All right, so we're looking at how relationships between characters are reflecting the environment in which they're in. So it'd be a really a good time to do a comparison between how Bruno possibly treats Pavel and then how Kotler treats Pavel. Okay, so that could be one body paragraph right there. Okay, you could also talk about how, and remember I said this was quite a sophisticated thing to do, how prejudice and discrimination is reflected in the setting. And you could do a comparison of Berlin and Auschwitz and how what Germany was like before the Nazi Party was in control, and how there was, not so much prejudice and discrimination. It was much more of a compassionate society, as reflected through the quotations, and then Auschwitz after that. Okay, so what I would really like you to focus on is doing a body paragraph using those ideas. So feel free to use the start of my sentence, but using your own analysis for the quotes that you've chosen, which we've already given you a couple here on this table. So you could choose some of these. For example, if you're doing the setting, the spider cracks, and then we've done ones for Berlin. You could also do Lieutenant Kotler in his characterization here, but here was much more about Kotler's reaction to Pavel versus Bruno here, where Bruno, his relationship, that he thinks he's quite a hero, and how Bruno and Pavel treats Bruno. Okay, so there's lots of ways that you could do compares and contrasts there. So I want you to have a go at creating a paragraph on how the universal message of prejudice and discrimination is represented in the boy in the striped pajamas. Okay, hopefully that makes sense. I'll be online to see if you need any help, but have a really good go at that. I'll create a Dropbox as well because I'd love to have a look at them, because these could be potentially, obviously, used for your assessment. All right, good luck.